Welcome, ladies, gentlemen, and all you lovely chaotic neutrals, to this new episode of Dragons and Diatribes. I'm one of your hosts, Ed, here, and I'm joined by my co hosts, Jared and Ethan. Go ahead and say hi, guys.
Hey, everybody.
Happy to be here.
Today, we're going to be talking about backstories. I think we've touched on this a little bit in the past before, but we're specifically going to talk about character backstories. We're going to start by kind of talking about how our process for creating our own characters' backstories when we're serving as players, and then talk about more how DMs can integrate backstories into their world and into their story. Kind of what we like to do, some tips and tricks, if you will, and we're going to see where this takes us. So I think getting started here, we're going to be talking about our own process and what we like doing. So I guess the first thing that I wanted to ask about is what you guys do as sort of the first step in your character creation process, right? What do you guys do to get inspired? How do you guys develop a character? Do you tend to draw inspiration from media? What do you guys do? So I figured out just whoever wants to take it first can chat a little bit about that.
I'll go. So for me, it's interesting because it really is dependent for me on the actual group that I'm playing with. Because some groups, especially if I'm coming in late or a lot of them have already decided on characters and then I get invited to the group, a lot of times they already have characters that they want to play and certain things, and I may focus more on the class, what they don't have in the party, or what they may need, and then build something around that based on aesthetic and story. Um, my natural tendency is to usually go aesthetic and story first, and then kind of fit my class to it. Um, and that just, I think, gives me some flexibility, and there's always room to like. Sometimes I may think of a class and then but then this I get with the story and the aesthetic, I'm like, actually this class isn't going to really work. It would be better if I was, you know, this with this subclass or something like that. So I definitely am much more of an aesthetic and then work back towards the like pen and paper stats than I would than actually be like a like class and stats all the way to the story, which is albeit it is less it's that's a more new way of looking at things. It used to be you rolled your stats and whatever your stats were kind of what you had and you based your character off of that. um so I definitely like the story aspect over the class first, and usually that also gives me the opportunity not to end up playing the same class over and over again, because I'll pick something and then I'll be like, all right, this is the class I'm playing because of the character I have, and it doesn't work really with any other character or class. So that's kind of how I tend to do backstory. Like I said, there is a little bit of variation, but usually it's aesthetic, story, class.
Okay. Do you ever feel like you get locked into classes you don't like? Or not
I haven't
like,
met a
but
class I
like,
don't like yet.
not like, but like would prefer, like, you're like, oh,
um
it's just the nature of the beast.
Not particularly. um Mainly because I was fortunate enough to get into some groups that are wacky and fun, and it really doesn't matter what kind of class you play. We're going to have a DM that is able to work with it, and even if we end up having three mages and one like tank and no healers, or like three healers and like one tank, there are ways to adjust and manipulate. And I've been lucky to have DMs that don't really see the need to have to be like we have these people and we need a rogue, right? Like I haven't had anybody like that. I will say that in my family campaign that I play in, my dad's oftentimes gets locked into things that he doesn't really, well, that he usually plays, but he's been wanting to branch out, but it's very difficult for him to, because he's already built himself into this role of like he's the paladin, he's kind of the leader, um, and he just kind of naturally fills that role, and so even when he doesn't play characters, he's ended up having to play characters that are mute so that he can't speak, so that people actually like figure it out for themselves and don't just ask him what he thinks and then we go with what he thinks.
He's
So
always pulled into being the party face.
he's just always pulled into being the party face no matter what he is, and so he's, I think, had to deal with that more. I think part of that is the age difference within that group, as well as just the character that he started playing on our first campaign. Whereas the other dads in that campaign that probably could have been that leadership role too, they picked characters that just weren't that way. They were a bard, but he was a bard that was kind of crazy and funny and not like, he was more of a comedian than like a face. My dad was the paladin, he was the face, he was, and so uh I've seen that happen. It hasn't happened to me yet, but that's also because I tend to not care unless it's a party with new people, which is why I was kind of talking about if it's new people, then I'll probably play a class based on what the others haven't picked, just so everybody has a good time and I know what I'm doing. So it's like it's mostly for them and they get to enjoy it and learn about the game. When I play with, like, for example, our group, I don't care what I play. We could end up having 4 warlocks and Ed'll figure out how to make it work, right? Or whatever. So I don't worry as much about the power or like power scaling the group as much with especially with advanced players.
Okay. Just figured I'd ask. I was curious because you
Yeah.
kind of when you said that like turn of phrase with like the class is the last, kind of made me just think like, sometimes you like the aesthetic and then you hate the like not hate but like the outcome is kind of just like, ooh, I'm kind of stuck in this. Like there's no real way to work it. But
And yeah, and I've definitely played characters where I thought it was a cool concept and it was a cool concept and aesthetic. It was a cool story, backstory for him. And then I picked a class and I was just like halfway through the campaign, I was like, man, I don't really like this class. But it wasn't the character's fault. It was, and I didn't get pigeonholed into that class. It was just more of like, this class fits this character. I haven't played this class before. I ended up not liking it. So in the future, I just avoid aesthetics or things that would fit into that class because I don't really like playing that. It was a druid, so I'm not a huge druid fan, like player wise. I love druids.
understandable, yeah.
It's just I'm definitely more of like mage, rogue, bard. I like
Sure.
utility classes, so which is weird because druids are like super utility, but
That's like
I
all
just
they are
I
usually.
just didn't like the aesthetic. I don't know. I like
The
thought the character
problem
concept was
with
cool, but if I'm gonna play something like that in the future, I'll play a ranger.
the problem with the druids classically is that they all, except for a couple of subclasses, tend to feel very samey. Like if you
Yeah,
play, two druids, within a game, right? You play a circle of the land and a circle of the shepherd, right? Like
yeah,
they feel very similar because there's so little that is drawn from your subclass,
yeah.
and even so few abilities that you get outside of spell casting, where you can sort of color it, and
This is
make
the
it
real
feel
problem.
unique.
This is the real issue I would say with the class. It's their greatest strength and their greatest weakness. It is the druid class is built around the ability to shape change into animals. So if you're super into that, that's great. You're gonna love the class. If you're not, you're never gonna reach the class's full potential. You're just not because that's
Yeah.
what it is, and that's cool for some people. But I'm just not into that. The character I created was not anything like that. Um, so
And
it
those are
was
the
just
coolest subclasses, are the ones that have variant uses for the wild shape. I'm thinking
yeah.
the circle of wildfire, the circle of stars, and the circle of spores
I think they kind of
specifically.
figured out with that newest grouping of subclasses. Like we need to figure out ways to replace the wild shape with something else instead of just not giving them abilities that don't use it at all.
Yeah,
I think
precisely.
they did a really good job with those classes with that. So
Anyway, after that brief diatribe on the druid, Jared,
Yeah.
what about you? What do you do when you're crafting backstories for a character? Where do you start usually? And I'm interested here because what I've noticed from playing with you for a few years is you tend to fall into very similar patterns with characters, which
That
is
is,
not a bad
yeah.
thing by any means, but just interesting.
I think it comes from. I mean, like we always say, I play like a lot of the smash and grab kind of guys, and I
Mhm.
think that always comes from the fact that I know like the groups that play are heavily magical. So like
I love a little smash and grab action.
it's always good, but you know,
Always fun.
at the end of the day, like I also I think I've like put myself in that position because of just who I know who I'm going to be in like a group with, and then I know what kind of chaos is gonna follow that. So I usually just do like some sort of physicality base, and then um, trying to think. Aesthetic wise, it's always I try to play it up a little bit differently every time, but it does fall in the realm that way. I don't play a lot of. I mean, I play some utility, but not a terrible amount. I mean, I guess you could call it like a monk utility, but um,
Yeah, you're
backstory
playing monk.
wise,
That's gonna be fun. I'm excited to see where that goes.
I love a good monk because they're pretty unique. But yeah, I wouldn't say it's like I mean, the backstory thing is all like, um, I base a lot of it off like the Netflix shows I've watched, kind of almost like like I had one character that was kind of like Vinland Saga esque, which was really cool. Like you know the classical like, oh my god, my dad was this cool guy. He got absolutely like
Burnt.
murdered by someone in more power. Now it's my cause to like avenge and come back or something like that. Like that's always a fun one.
Spoiler alert for Vinland Saga.
Spoiler alert for the first episode of Vinland
Yeah,
Saga.
right. So if
Sorry,
you have
my
Hey,
bad.
it's
That's your
episode
problem.
5. Episode 5.
It actually might be in like the trailer almost. I think you could deduce it from the trailer of the show. It's pretty apparent.
Yeah, probably.
It's like a small child, and then like it skips to like him being a grown adult. You're like, okay, yeah, we know what happened here.
And it's an anime.
Yeah, there's always some dark tragedy stuff like that. Maybe that's
Talk
yeah.
about
it's like
what a
anime esque
great anime.
almost. It's like anime esque almost. It's like
Oh,
you know
that's such a good
spark
anime.
spark tragedy conflict, grow up, be strong, resolution kind of deal.
That's a great anime, though, by the way. Shout out Vinland Saga. You should check it out,
It's a great
especially
show.
if you're into anime or into Vikings. Either one.
Yeah,
If you're into
Vikings, yeah.
both, even better.
Or if you just like, good shows.
Yeah.
Good show.
Or if you like good shows, you should watch it. Great.
It's a good gateway anime. I've found that like I think I talked about
Yeah.
Attack on Titan with this is like the same way where it's like it's anime, but it doesn't have a lot of the anime things. You
Yeah,
know,
it
like
doesn't have
the
a lot of the
animes.
tropes. Yeah.
It doesn't have the sense of humor where it's like, because if you show somebody something that's really anime, they may be turned off by it.
One Piece.
Vinland Saga. Yeah. Well, One Piece is an
I,
exceptionally good.
I was gonna say
like
JoJo's. JoJo's is
Oh,
hard.
JoJo's
JoJo's is hard as
Because
hell
it's-
to get into
exactly.
right off the bat.
it's because they're highly stylized and they're
Yeah.
very anime, whereas Vinland Saga and Attack on Titan, while it's artistically stylized, the anime itself is not
Yeah.
stylized. But anyway,
We digress
another
yet again.
we diatribe.
Another
So-
one. But yeah, that's
Yeah.
pretty much it. I don't really have any like super niche things that I can like reference because it's all like you said, kind of been the same thing.
I
But
feel like you also take a lot from your own life. Like I feel like a lot, at least the characters that I've played with you, a lot of them have been
They're all military.
soldiers or soldier-esque. Not just in D&D, but also in other like games.
Yeah.
City of Mist.
yeah,
City
I forgot about
Mist
that. That was
was,
actually a really good one. I forgot about that.
That was
Um,
good.
Yeah.
so do you take from experience?
I
that
think
you
it's just because
experience that
it's easier for me to naturally play like a tactical character in my head,
Hmm.
like how I would think. It's hard.
Yeah.
It's hard for when Alden and Alan played. It was always just like it was exactly like them. They were just like the most random, goofy people
Yeah.
I could think of, and I was like, this makes so much sense. I don't know. I guess it's hard to kind of put yourself in like a fake mindset, but I'm not really like an actor or like a theater person esque in that way. It's very difficult for me to be
Sure.
like an entirely different persona of who I am, I guess. Maybe if I
For
had
sure.
like I don't know, more
Well, that
time
kind
in the more reps in the theater room.
well, that tracks for me too, because like I play very cerebral characters most of the time, even if they're not mages, and it's because that's how I think. I'm very up in my head, and I think very high level a lot of the time, and so especially in combat or other situations, if I'm playing a character where I'm like I'm seeing the big picture and I'm trying to like do specific things, um, while seeing the big picture, I that's the kind of player or character I gravitate towards. Like for example, in one of the campaigns I'm playing in, I'm playing a barbarian zealot, and it's so hard for me to just not. And I'm not dumb. I'm like average intelligence. I rolled pretty well for the character, and so I think my lowest is intelligence. I think it's like a straight 10. So it's not like I'm stupid, but like just me not talking in the way I usually talk, I have to kind of be like, what does my character actually care about? All he cares about is dying a warrior's death and being a martyr for his faith, like because that's the highest honor he can get. And so, and like do the will of this god of war. So he's like trains all the time. He has a giant scythe that he uses, like, and but he just wants to fight powerful people, like that his god points him at and says, "This is a bad person. Kill him, or if you die, that's the most honorable thing you can do is die in battle." And so it's like I have to remember that when I'm like people are trying to solve problems and stuff. I can't solve the problem. I have to just, especially in social situations, I have to just sit back. That's really hard for me.
Yeah, or at least
Yeah,
Because
I
I'm
have
so
that
used to
same.
like
I have that
contribute the average like input,
yeah.
right? Like
But what is he gonna do?
no high
He's
level
like a
thoughts
six
floating
foot
around.
five like
Yeah.
Asmar. He's like just with a giant scythe. Like nobody's gonna come and ask him his opinion. He's
See, I have that same issue, and kind of because my DM I think bleeds through a little bit when I'm playing, because I when I'm playing characters, I tend to build characters who um, are more um, oriented towards problem solving. Characters generally with either high intelligence or wisdom. Um, it's going to give them some reason to be involved, or charisma, I guess. Just generally leaning on some of those, just because I enjoy playing characters that are talkers. I think that has to do with my play style. But as far as when I build a character, sort of construct a backstory, generally the first thing I'm struck with, just overall, it tends to be when I'm reading through, I'm checking out some classes, reading some subclasses or something. I'll just kind of be struck with an image, like an aesthetic, kind of out of the blue. I'll be reading up on a particular character, and I'll just get a flash of like what a character looks like in my head, and like I'm like, okay, so this is how I'm kind of envisioning what this character does and what they're like, and then I kind of build the backstory in some ways off of the aesthetic and what I think matches them. And then it depends too, because this is, I guess, going into a different question, but like it depends on if I'm just building a character that I am hoping to play at some point, or if there's a particular specific setting for a campaign that we already have that I'm going to be, building for. So it varies a little bit depending on that, how I guess in depth my backstory goes, or how kind of I mean how far away I move from just the aesthetic, I
Yeah.
guess,
Yeah.
because I mean, one of the characters I've been carrying in my back pocket for probably 6 years is a melee ranger who I basically just kind of had this like, scimitar wielding
Is this
like
the desert?
Bedouin.
Is this the desert
Yeah, it's
guy?
the desert ranger.
Yeah, and I've heard about
Yeah,
this for years.
literally like a Bedouin
Bro.
who like is like dragon inspired. And now, actually, interestingly enough, since I've waited for so long, I could pull on the Drake Warden if I
Bro,
wanted to.
I would
Oh yeah,
use-
yeah.
I would love to play at some point. I know I just started a campaign, but I would love to play a campaign where it's like Arrakis, but D&D. Like go full Dune, like desert planet, like no water. Like that'd be sick.
A
I think that'd be so.
Dune would be pretty hard because
I
there's a lot to already play off of.
because you can reskin the purple worms
Yeah,
easy.
yeah,
But and I'm not even saying we just riff off Arrakis. I'm not saying we rip it off entirely, but like that'd be so cool, just a whole desert planet. I'm a huge fan of like environmental campaigns. So like Rime of the Frost Maiden, loved that campaign because it's all snow and ice, and you have to deal with the elements as well as like what's going on. And I just think that like gives it such cool flavor. I hope you guys kind of explore my world a lot too, because there's so many places like that. Because that's a huge thing for me is like making the environment actually interactive with the players, because I feel like that really draws you in. If like the environment's trying to kill you, you're like, oh, I'm actually here in this place.
yeah. I saw someone run a West Marches through a desert world, and it was fucking cool. It was so cool.
I love I love desert anything.
Yeah,
I just
it was
think it's
super
like
dope.
goes hard.
It's kind of interesting that you bring that up because I was thinking about this earlier, and it plays into character creation because you just in terms of campaign, like setting up a campaign. This is kind of bleeding into our next session, but or section. But I was you mentioned, and I have seen this, Ethan. Is a lot of times you'll have a particular environmental thing going
Yeah.
on, and that's the very much a driving force behind your game, and it in a way necessitates tweaking a character to fit in, which is
Mhm.
fine. And it's interesting because with me, it's very much not driven by environment per se, but everything that drives my campaigns is tone. And so,
Mhm.
like when I create a campaign, I basically require everyone to fit within the tone of what I'm doing. Like because if I'm running a horror campaign, right, you're not having you're not having a bugbear with dwarfism who is a wild magic sorcerer who's whatever, like
Yeah.
it's uh, kind of the way I set it up, and with the players I'm playing with, it kind of necessitates a backstory that matches the tone, whereas you kind of graft them as opposed of as opposed to into the genre per se, into the actual
Environment.
place.
And
Um,
that's probably because my I play in such a way where my world I want my world to feel so there are it exceeds genres, right? Because I think of it like Middle Earth. When 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 Frodo falls into the Barrow Wight's chamber, that's kind of horror slash thriller. It falls immediately into that kind of style, and then he's pulled out, saved by Tom Bombadil, back in the forest. But then there's dark forests, like creepy dark thriller forests. There's like fairy tale forests. There's all these different genres within the world, because obviously all the genres that we read and write about are facets of the real world we live in. And so yeah, I think that environment, and I also I want to give the world's environments as much as you guys want early, so that because for me it's like I wasn't put into this world and the world wasn't shaped around me as like a person. I had to conform to certain ways to the world around me. And so I feel that should be this for me. It works the best that way with D&D too. I'm going to create the world, I'm going to tell you about it, I'm going to give you environments, kind of certain things. I gave you guys a lot of liberty this time because I wanted to kind of build the world a little bit around you guys, but I also was like, this is kind of the time frame, gods aren't around. I gave you generalizations and allowed you guys to kind of craft backstories based on that. But I do think that the especially if you're doing a campaign where you're creating your own world and you're starting at a low level, the characters should be shaped by the world that they're in, not the other way around. Until such a time as they're like super badass heroes. Yeah, and then maybe the world shapes to them a little bit because they're so powerful they can do that. But at the beginning, it's like you're dealing with the world as well. You know, that's how I think about it anyway. And I like when people write backstories accordingly, and I
That's
write backstories according to that too.
Yeah, and I think that that brings us on to our next point here. And this is just something I don't know if we need to like go person to person on this, but just like talking about appropriate backstories, like for your level. Like this is
Yeah,
something that I've come across a few times, usually with new players who don't really get how the leveling system works. And it's like, okay, you guys are going to be third level. It's like, well, I was a general, or
like
like I was a vampire hunter. And like, I'm like, okay, that's fair. It's pretty cool. You want to play that, but like, as I actually did that the very first character I made too. We were starting at
yeah.
level 1, and I was like, I was the sidekick to a vampire hunter, and my DM was like, no, you weren't, because you'd have
Well,
been
I
dead.
feel like I don't know. Sidekick
Sidekicks a
can
lot.
be.
Yeah, I'm cool with that.
I
I'd be cool with that.
Well, you
Well, at
say
level
that,
one,
but
maybe
my
not. Level three, yes. Level one,
is
you just came off
level
the
one,
farm, my friend.
yeah,
You were like picking carrots the other day, and now
because my
you're
party currently has they're level 12 and they have a level 6 companion, and that mofo is like he's an NPC. He's in danger constantly. Like
yeah,
they basically have to try to figure out a way for him to not join them in the fight to
yeah,
try to keep him from dying every time.
yeah.
But I just wanted to say, it's a good thing to work with your DM to what is appropriate for your world and for your level, for your
And
backstory.
and that is one thing I will say. I prefer level three to level one, and the reason is, and maybe it would be different if everybody was brand new to the game. Then I'd probably be like, okay, level one, because it kind of gives you the mechanics without completely confusing you with all this stuff. But like level three allows for, I think it's extremely difficult unless you're just learning how to play and you're like, yeah, you're a monk at level one. It's hard to explain how you became a monk, or even like, I'm a fighter. How did you learn? Unless
Yeah.
you were like, I was trained from infancy and now I'm like, okay. But it's still like a
Yeah,
stretch at level one, I feel like.
you're totally mid.
Yeah, versus like at level three, you at least can be like, yeah, I've been training at this monastery and I'm
Yeah,
like, I'm above the average student now, right? Or something.
Yeah.
Whereas at
And
level one, it may work for beginner players because they're just like, I picked this guy and I'm gonna fight with a sword, and you're like, perfect. That's great. We don't need to even worry about backstory. We're just learning how to play the game. But like
yeah,
once you learn and you want a backstory, I think level three at least, because like mages, they require like knowledge, learning. Where'd you go to school? If you're like a level one guy, you're starting at, I don't know. It can be. I think it can be a little bit limiting with some
See,
of those character backstories.
I bump it up by a little bit even from that because like I'm with a campaign of 3 pretty close to first time players, and we started at third level. I'll usually with experienced players, I will not start any lower than fifth level, just because I like backstories to be able to have a little bit more involved. Like because if you're a level 1 character, I mean you can do it, but it's hard to write something like a vampire villain into
Yeah,
your backstory because a
you're so weak.
vampire, you're so weak, and unless it's something that's like oh, this, the town writ large was attacked and a bunch of us escaped or something like that, but it's hard to have a something like that set up. And I also feel like it just gives, but that's also constraining. So I feel like fifth level gives even freedom because fifth level is really where it's like, okay, you're this town, you got a little bit of renown to your name. People might hire you just based on a bit of your reputation.
you can have more freedom in constructing a backstory, and you can have more complicated and more things that have been, gone into your backstory. Um, which I like, and it also allows you to be a little bit further along into your story, which
Yeah.
allows you to kind of
Yeah.
gather more, which I like more
That's the
'cause
point
it
I was gonna
allows.
say is like you get like in reality, if you start at 1, you only should have like 4 sentences tops. You should have no accomplishments, no feats. You need to be like, this is who I am, this is where I'm from, this is what I want to be. It's like a
Yep.
like a little
That's a very anime start.
yeah,
Like
Yep.
exactly.
Naruto.
Yeah.
He was like,
You know
I
where
just
you know
make
who
happen
he
to
is,
be.
you know where he is, you know what he wants to be when he grows up. That's all you get for like the first 50 episodes.
Yeah.
And he can do one like one jutsu.
And
Big deal.
I would, and I actually just thought of this. This is an original thought. So
We'll see.
let's hear that. Let's see what we turn out.
I'm gonna
I
ask
think it
Chat
would be
GPT if this is original.
I think it would be super fun to have level 1 characters and they all buy into the fact that the DM's creating their backstories for them. So it literally plays like an anime. Like Naruto didn't know all of his backstory, which was like he was the nine-tailed fox. He could do all this stuff. His father was a person. I won't spoil it. Hopefully you already know, anybody listening, but whatever. Like he didn't know all that. So that would be the DM being like, all right, you know your name, where you're from, and what you want to be.
Yeah.
And that's it. And I get to pick everything else. Like I get to write on that would be actually kind of fun. But you could still do that at level 5.
Yeah,
so
you could. Yeah,
kinda-
that's true. You could do that. Yeah, you can do that at any level.
And that's
you can do that at any level, but still.
the interesting advantage of level is that your character
You
is
can be
going
murdered
to
by
be,
animals.
Well, you can be murdered by animals, but also if you start at level 1, right?
You fall
you
down
have
the
very
stairs
little
and you die.
backstory, but the entirety of your development is in front of you. So what's going to happen if you start at level 1 and you're planning for like a long-term campaign? Like we are going to be, our characters are going to be very shaped by
Yeah.
the events of this, right? Whereas if you come in with a slightly later level character, what you're looking to do, what I've found is you want to have setup in the backstory that basically puts you on a developmental arc that you want to sort of complete, right? So, like, if you have certain elements in your backstory, like, such and such character is someone I want revenge on, such and such character is someone I want to rescue, such and such character is someone I want to make amends with. Basically, that stuff you have if you're starting at a higher level, and your
Yeah.
goal is to sort of finish out the trajectory that was started with your backstory. It's
Versus
basically
level 1 where you may not even have that. You're just coming in and being like, hey, I want to be like a sellsword. And then you do all this stuff, and then maybe like 2 levels later, you like fuck over this person, and then the whole rest of the campaign, you're like, oh, actually, I need to make amends with this person. But it's like
Exactly.
within the story instead of previously.
your backstory develops in the campaign if
Yeah.
you're starting it, which is an interesting. Not something that I like to do as much, just because not my style. I really like the concept of the sort of classic people with different stories come together and kind of help each other resolve their problems.
Yeah, and I like
I like
riffing off of backstories a lot. Like,
Yeah.
so I agree with you.
Can we? It's not in our notes. Can we discuss background versus backstory?
Oh, that's actually probably
Because that just popped into
Yeah.
my head when you were talking about level 1.
Please do.
So
You want to take it away, Jared?
I need to develop my thought more. I thought someone would have something about this. I'll be
Oh,
honest.
okay.
Go ahead.
I'll
If you
go.
want to,
So-
if you want to go first, let me think.
At the mechanical level, everybody listening, at the mechanical level, a background is a mechanical theme in the book that gives you certain mechanical, like physical pen and paper advantages in certain things. Like could give you, proficiency in charisma. It could give you an extra language. It could give you an ability to, if you go into a new town, if let's say you're a traveling merchant, know somebody, like connections, right? And it's usually very vague. and you can't. There are multiple ones in the player's handbook that you can use, the PHB, but you can also create a background with your DM's discretion in really anything. Whereas a backstory may give you background elements, like maybe you were kidnapped by dark elves, let's say, and you're a human, and then you learned undercommon because you like lived there a long time and then finally escaped. Okay, well, the background starts where it's like, I was a slave. Your slave could be being a slave could be your background, and as a part of that slave trait, you understand the language of your captors, right? But that would be a background. But your backstory is the story you like wove to get that background. So that's your backstory, how you escaped, and now you're doing something to like into the future. Like now I'm here to like free all the slaves in the world.
It's mechanical
Right,
versus thematic.
Yeah, it's a mechanical versus thematic.
Background is sort of the archetype of your backstory.
Yeah,
without
that's a
any
good
of
way
the
to put it, too.
specifics. So it's interesting you brought up the slave thing, because that was basically my very first character, anti-slave or former slave, or one of my first.
A classic.
I wanted to ask you
Classic
guys if
trope.
we're moving here a little bit, because I wanted to talk about move into the DM realm a little. I want to talk about constraints, and Ethan touched on this a little bit, but basically the constraints that you give on your players for backstories, if any, as well as, do you guys tend to make the world more malleable to what the players are interested in, or are you kind of more hard and fast with like, well, that's not going to work with what I've set up, so we're going to tweak it? What's your guys' approach with that? First off, the expectations you set for characters, how kind of flexible you are with your own roles as DMs, creating characters in.
Can I go first?
Yeah, by all
please do.
means.
So I'm pretty inflexible, quote unquote, with my world. The world doesn't change for your particular situations or things. However, if you want to play a bullywog in a desert, I'm not going to say no. But I'm not changing the world to make it easier for you. So you have to understand that that is going to be a difficulty that you're going to have to overcome. The reason I give this example to those who may not know, bullywogs need to be completely submerged in water like once every 8 hours or something like that, or they die. So if you're playing a bullywog in a desert setting, you got to figure that out. I'm totally okay with you however you figure that out. If you can, great. I love seeing creativity, but I'm not changing it to make it easier for you. So you have to go into that knowing you're going to have to be creative and find ways to figure that out, and know that I'm going to mess with those ways as the DM, right? So for me, it's like you can be really whatever you want, but my world doesn't change. So you can choose to handicap yourself, because I sometimes like playing characters that aren't the most powerful in the group, or like they have a certain very specific special set of skills, but it comes with these negative side effects, right? That's fine with me, but you just have to know that going in, that the world's not going to change because of you. You have to deal with the fact that you're at a disadvantage if you choose to play that.
Yeah, I'm kind of in that same realm. I don't mind a handicap, but I definitely do mind like I don't mind a buff either though. Like if you want
Yeah.
to play something that's super well tuned to where like you're either going to start or be, I'm okay with that too.
Yeah, like for another example, like if you decide to be a warforged in the desert, they don't need to eat or drink, and like heat and cold don't really affect them. That's perfect. You've decided to optimize your character to be really, really effective in the environment that you're in, and that's totally fine too. That's a buff to you.
Right.
Good job.
But then if it flips,
But if it flips,
you screw.
that's fine. Like it is what it is. Like and characters that play the Warforged and the Bullywog can both have a great time if they know ahead of time that, hey, the world's not changing for you. So you've given yourself an advantage or a disadvantage. But if the world changes, that may be bad for Warforged and better for Bullywog. or vice versa,
Yeah,
right?
I definitely and for me, like mine are very. I try to do themes via regions, if that
Yeah.
makes sense. So like, I don't know if Ethan, you remember this one, but Ed, you remember the city that didn't allow weapons? That was kind of like from I got that idea from, or maybe it didn't. Maybe it was, didn't allow magic. Can't remember which one it was, but um, like
Might have been
that.
one of each.
Yeah, that was like that for me is another like what's the word? Handicap, I guess it could be. Like if you know you're going into that and
Environmental
that's your
challenge.
thing, and that's your thing, like you're either gonna run into a lot of problems or you're just like gonna have to sit back for a while.
Or you have ways to get around it, like, oh yeah, I'll give you my weapon, them not knowing I'm a an arcane fighter and
Eldritch
can
Knight.
just summon an Eldritch Knight that can just summon my weapon whenever I want to. Yeah, sure, take it. I don't care.
Right. So like just things like that. Like I also don't try to change it super hard, but I would say there are limits. Like if you want to play a random race, like just know that you will go somewhere and be looked at strangely. Like
Yep.
most of the time, especially if you're super rare. So I don't
For
like
sure.
I don't limit it, but I will try to make it like known that you will like be that socially awkward. You'll be like instantly socially awkward no matter how charismatic you'll be. You'll be weird looking. You'll stand out. People will assume the worst. Stuff like that.
Or like they've never seen you. Like I've
Or they have no
played with
idea,
people
yeah.
who could be like a weird race, and I was like, okay, these aren't in my world. I'll play it. Your backstory is somehow tied, like you came through a portal, like as a baby, and somebody just raised you or whatever. But you're the only one in the world, so people are gonna look at you and be like, "Whoa, that thing is a giant bird person." If it's an Aarakocra, and it's like we've never seen this before, and it talks to us, and like, what is going on, right? Like,
Yeah, I have no issue giving race constraints. I actually did on the campaign I'm running now. I said you've got about 6 races you could be. You could be a human, you could be an elf, you could be a dwarf, you could be a halfling, you could be a gnome, half elf, and half orc if you are from this particular part. And that was it.
Mhm.
There were no other. I suppose they also had tiefling and Asmar available, but it was a kind of similar deal where it's like, this is going to be different than what they normally are.
Yeah.
So I'll put that on if it reinforces the tone, because running kind of a Victorian Gothic horror, right? It really throws off the vibe if you have like a cat person or a lizard person rolling up. Just even or someone pulls up a GIF, right? Like the hippo people. It's like,
Yeah.
that's not really in theme for what's going on here. So I have no issue with that. Classes. I've heard of people limiting like the artificer or gunslingers, which I'm in
Yeah.
principle okay with. In principle, I don't really do it just because I'll limit the extent of it sometimes. Where if someone's like, "Oh, I learned to use a gun from my training regiment," and it's like, well, they're not really that well, readily available, right? Like a gun, we have a gunslinger in this world, right? And his thing was basically like, I was like, so you cannot have gotten this from someone else. Like you need to have somehow constructed this, invented
Yeah,
it, or
that's kind of like what they did with
Mhm.
like Percy when they changed to 5e. He was a gunslinger, and he was like, you created this thing because it's not in the world yet. So
You like
And then
you
I,
have to find like an inherent reason for having it.
I guess I did
Yeah.
do that. There's no like gunpowder, at least in the time frame that you guys are in my world. Now, I may have changed the time frame of when you guys were in if somebody was a gunslinger. I decided to be a gunslinger.
Gotcha.
But
I also, as far as subclasses, because I don't ban classes, at least the 13, actual classes. Um, there's one subclass I have on my never allowed in my game list, which is wild magic sorcerer. Everything else is free game because I can deal with powerful. Like I can we have a Twilight Domain cleric in my game right now, right? There's I'm fine with powerful classes. I'm fine even having the Blood Hunter come in, right? Which is pretty strong. But I do not like the Wild Magic Sorcerer. I don't like the design of it, and I don't like the way it can it makes balancing encounters almost impossible. So that's the one where I'm like, if you want to do wild magic, we'll find some other way to do it thematically. But wild magic sorcerer is the only one that I'm like hard no on every time.
Ed just doesn't like the chaos, I guess, man.
Zero fun.
Not at all. I do not like it because it.
Some would say almost railroady.
It's not railroady so much as like I construct my combats.
First we ban
In such a-
classes, then we ban groups, then we ban
He doesn't
spells.
want to get turned into a potted plant.
Well, that's I
Lame.
construct my combats in such a way intentionally that it's going to be as close as humanly possible, right? Coin flip on party win versus monster win, right? And so the problem with the wild magic sorcerer is, right, turn one, you might turn the enemy into a sheep, but you also might fireball your own party.
Yes.
Right. It makes, because I try to walk on razor thin margins for player experience, which Wild Magic Sorcerer makes impossible. Because I can plan for the cleric dropping, whatever they're going to drop. Right. The Wild Magic Sorcerer just has certain things, which, like, yeah, if things go wrong, like, and yeah, it's not likely, but I just think it feels terrible for everybody else in a party to get TPK'd because the Wild Magic Sorcerer rolled like crap. I do not think that's fun gameplay.
Yeah, I get that.
But it would be hilarious in the moment. It would
Yeah,
be
I don't know.
super funny.
Another thing is, if I was running with a totally Goonie campaign, yeah, screw it. But if I'm trying to do something that's more, tonally like epic or more horror oriented, where
Yeah.
I'm probably not going to go with the kind of zany.
Yeah, well, I
If
mean,
everyone's-
it would be
like,
hard
if
to do
people
like
care
a horror.
about their characters dying, right? If like people actually have emotional investment,
Well, it's
I
also
don't
hard
want
to be
them-
like have a horror campaign and be like, I turned the guy into a chicken. I turned into a potted plant.
I
It's
turned
like,
into
okay,
one specifically, just me.
That's
Yeah.
not the tone.
Yeah.
No, it's if people have emotional investment in their characters and like would be upset, if their character died, I'm not gonna let a wild magic sorcerer in there because, like, and I also don't want to neuter the wild magic sorcerer, right? So if I'm letting someone play a wild magic sorcerer, I'm gonna have them often roll on the table because that's why they pick the subclass, right? Because I could be an asshole and just like not let them ever roll on it. But then they lose a bunch of their abilities. They they just kind of lose out on stuff, which I do not like. So I tend to ban that one. But anything that's powerful, like because Twilight Domain Cleric is super busted actually.
Blood Hunter's super strong as well.
Blood Hunter, yeah, is very good, and I'm fine making my parties really strong. I just I like the players to have I like consistency in the damage output and what they're able to do. Because if they are inconsistent, it makes it difficult to plan encounters that are going to be challenging and interesting.
Yeah, and then you're either scaling up or scaling down live, and that's always a difficult task too. Just one more thing to manage.
Yeah, and like I know it's
especially
okay to, like,
scaling up, because scaling up feels like you can tell when it's scaled up live.
Yeah.
Which is
Yeah, and I don't
unfortunate.
like. Yeah, and I really don't like changing things mid combat. Like if the creature's winning or losing, I
Mhm.
try to avoid it if I can. Just because, like, yeah, there's elements. Maybe the paladin gets lucky and crits on the fiend round one. It's like, yeah, bummer. Sometimes what I'll do if it's like, I'll manufacture a second stage of the boss fight. Be like, oh, you worked through the first health bar. Maybe now it has, its hit points back, its speed goes down a little bit, and its armor class goes up because, you know, something happened. It grows some armor
It
depending
evolves,
on what they're
yeah.
fighting.
Right.
Or something else, like it can go faster now, but it's easier to hit, right? I'll do that sometimes, and give it some. But generally, I mean, I'll even plan multi-stage boss fights, but I tend to like to just let things ride as they ride. This point in my DM career, I don't really alter any dice rolls.
Mhm.
So, I like to make things do what I can in character creation to make things feel as fair as possible in the playing. Which I just I literally there was one of my buddies wanted to play a wild magic sorcerer um for this horror campaign. I was just like, yeah, we're not going to do that, but we'll talk about how we can make what you want to do work, and we did.
Yeah, I get that.
Um,
Like the level
yeah,
of chaos that it comes from is kind of, yeah. It's like it's all preference thing. I see. Like I definitely wouldn't do it for like a long term thing. I can see the
that's
struggle in
exactly
that.
right.
Yeah, I can see the struggle in
Yeah,
that.
Would you
yeah.
say
If you,
Wild Magic Barbarians also out?
so that one I'm more okay with because every single roll on it is positive, and there's only 12, and they're predictable, right? Because okay, great. The barbarian gets an extra d6 of damage every turn. Great. Okay, he can Misty Step every turn. Great. Okay, like that's a very narrow set of things, and they're all actually relatively equivalent on the power scale.
Yeah.
Because if your sorcerer can't speak or gets turned into a plant, or like that eliminates them from the fight, or there's ways that you could just eliminate opponents from the fight, right? Nothing that the barbarian is gonna get does that. And I actually wish the table was a little bit stronger for the barbarian, just because I think that's actually a really well designed subclass. And it's random done right, or it's all positive to the player. 'Cause it feels really bad also as a player to just get it, like unless you're running kind of a meme campaign, like,
Yeah.
which is fine, but it feels really bad to just get absolutely screwed by your own class's ability.
Yeah.
Um, Now it's funny as shit, but um, if if you're running a campaign where it's okay to have that
It's
kind of thing,
funny. It's
great.
funny the first time at a low level. That
Yeah,
I'd put it that way. It'd be fun for like a couple of times, and then it'd be like, all right, I'm trying to do this, and it just keeps screwing me or someone
For
else,
sure.
especially somebody else.
For
It's one.
sure.
It's one thing to screw yourself over. It's another thing to just screw somebody that is trying to like help the whole time, and you're like, oh my bad, dude. I didn't mean to like just take you out of that completely. My bad.
which is the problem I have with wild magic. Is
Yeah,
it can
that's
screw
the
over
biggest issue.
your
You can
party.
screw other people, not just like because once
The
you
DM.
once you decide that you could like screwing yourself is kind of part of the gig, but it's like when it starts affecting everybody else, you're like, damn, this kind of sucks.
Unless they've
Yeah, like
all bought
blood.
in.
Yeah, but like
That's
for
true.
everyone to buy into it, it'd be pretty. I mean,
Yeah.
that'd be pretty impressive. I'd be very impressed if a group did that.
Yeah, and I try to keep that out because like I try to think about it, right. If like somebody came up to me with kind of a more serious campaign, and the DM was like, "Hey, would you be okay with somebody else playing a wild magic sorcerer?" I wouldn't say no, but I would want to. But I wouldn't, just because it would seem kind of asinine. But like, uh, just I don't know. I try to keep people from having to have that conversation.
I'd be interested to hear. So, Palmer, one of our friends who's in a campaign with us, he's playing in another campaign with a bunch of other people. He's playing a wild magic sorcerer and absolutely loving it. So I'd be interested to hear his thoughts on like how he feels it's affected the party and what the DM has done to mitigate the challenges while still letting him use his ability. I think what he's done is a lot of the wild magic rolls aren't in combat. he keeps them out of combat. They're all thematic based on character growth. And
Uh,
sometimes they're helpful and sometimes they're not.
yeah.
So I that would be one way to do it. And I don't think he very often, because I think it's only when you roll like natural ones or natural 20s, isn't it?
So how it works is every time so it's certainly every time you cast a spell,
There's a
you
chance
have
you
to
roll something to see
if you roll a natural one
right.
on a dice, it happens. But also anytime you roll, like, so there's also an ability they have where they can just gain advantage on any check they want. And once they use that at any point afterwards, if they cast a spell of first level or higher, the DM can have them roll on. So it's
Yeah.
up to the DM, can have them roll on the wild magic table to regain the ability to gain that automatic advantage.
Yeah.
So like the optimized way to play it, optimized is like that. Those are air quotes.
Yeah.
The optimized way is to like just blow advantage, and then, you know, if the DM is giving you the wild magic rolls, just keep gaining basically gaining inspiration equal to the number of spell slots you have, in exchange for rolling on the wild magic table, is along with some other stuff you get, but
Yeah.
that's optimal thing. So and that's the other thing too, is
They
like
may have
I don't
tweaked it then. 'Cause I don't think the way he's talked to me about it, and I played a little bit in that campaign, it never really happened. He very rarely rolled on the table. So they may have tweaked it to make it more of a
possible. I'm pulling it up here. Let's see. Yeah, so once per turn. Okay, so here it is. Once per turn, the DM can have you roll. This is third level. Can have you roll a d20 immediately after you cast a sorcerer spell of first level or higher. If you roll a 1, the wild magic surge table to create a
you have
magical
to roll a
effect.
1 on that roll. Gotcha.
So and the DM has to call for it. So the DM can
Yeah.
just never call for it. So that's and then also at first level, they can gain advantage on one attack roll, ability check, or saving throw. Once you do so, you must finish a long rest before you can use this feature. Anytime before you regain the use of this feature, the DM can have you roll on the Wild Magic Surge table immediately after you cast a sorcery spell, first level or higher. You then regain the use of that feature. So that's what I was talking about. You can gain advantage, and then if you cast a spell, the
You
DM
have
can
to
just
roll on
have
the
you
table. You
roll.
can't even roll it's not the roll to get a 1 to start the
No.
surge. It's just a straight.
Yep, just roll on the table.
Yeah.
And then at 6th level, whenever another creature you can see makes an attack roll, an ability check, or a saving throw, you can use a reaction and spend 2 sorcery points to roll a d4 and apply that number. That kind of sucks. 14th level, whenever you roll on the Wild Magic Surge, you could roll twice and use either number. I think that should be the 6th level ability, frankly. And that they should have something better on 14th level. And then 18th level, when you roll damage for a spell and roll the highest number on any of the dice, it's sort of a crit sort of thing with spells. Like if you roll like, a firebolt and you roll 3d10 and one of them ends up being a 10, you get to roll an additional damage dice, then add it to the total, which is okay, but like just because the problem is either
damage output by that much though.
it does not. Yeah, it's a kind of
one more
capstone.
one more dice or whatever.
And I'm not here to laud and sing the praises of the Wild Magic Sorcerer. That's actually one of my least favorite subclasses for the Sorcerer. I was just trying to pick your brain as to.
I agree.
It could be more well done. I would say they could redo it. It could be better. It could be way better.
I think what they should do is they should do something. I think they should have done this with a barbarian, and I think they could do it with the sorcerer too. But what they have with one of the, I forget what subclass it is, but the way it works is you have a table that goes 1 through 12. Mm-hmm. And the way it works is at like early levels, you get to roll a d4, on the table, and then you get to roll a d6, and then you get to roll a d8, and then a d10, and then a d12. So, and the table, you get more and more powerful as you go down.
Yeah.
So I think that would be a way to do wild magic, is like you have relatively weak effects, 1 through 4, and then you gradually gain access to more powerful effects. And I
But
think
you
that
can
would just
still
make
end
it
up getting the weak effects if you just roll that way. So it still
precisely.
keeps
And
the range,
it's
but it doesn't bust it.
yeah,
Yeah.
and it doesn't make it super debilitating to the party because I think if you had semi predictable, like not predictable, but like a bounded accuracy
Yeah.
for it, it would be more fun. But
Yeah, and it would still give enough like chaos to be like, oh, I rolled a 1 and I could have rolled an
Yeah.
8 and had this dope thing, and I rolled a 1 and I get this slight upgrade, but it's not even really an upgrade at this level. So now
Yeah.
we have to deal with that, right?
Sure.
Like the fact that this didn't do what we wanted it to, kind of.
And I think that's better than sort of the, like, because who the hell cares if your hair turns pink or whatever, or you get gross feathers, right? Like, it's a couple, yeah. But anyway, after that long, long diatribe, I think what we can talk about now is some tropes. And this is, I think, tropes that that you like to use as yourself with your characters that you create, or also tropes that you like and dislike when players pick them up. So, anyone who wants to chat on that?
I'll go. Like I kind of said for the earlier, like as I think Ethan has dubbed it, the anime storyline, the start, where it's not quite not quite defined as in like like you have this huge like 8 paragraph thing, or like you have all the other stuff written out, but like the kind of like you are this guy, this is kind of where you've come from, where you've been, and like what your kind of goal is. I kind of like that one because I think that's the one I've used for yours. Which pretty much, I mean, there's some fluff in there for sure, just to give you enough expansion. But I think it's literally like who he was, like where he's been, or who he is, where he's from, where he's been, and like what he really hopes to do, and then everything else in between is kind of how I feel. Where that's where like you jump into it, right?
Yeah.
Like you jump in right before the what he wants, or like or what they want to be, or like their end goal. Like you jump in right
How do
before
you feel
that.
about us starting in your town, your hometown?
I thought it was pretty
What
cool
do you
actually. I
think
liked
about that
it.
opening? I didn't know.
I like the
I tried
opening.
my best.
It was good. No, it was
Okay.
fine. Yeah, no, it was good. It was.
So for those of you
You can
who
expand on it. Yeah, go for it.
are talking, I started, instead of having the bar scene opening, I kind of did the bar scene opening with both Jared and Ed's character, funny enough. But then it like completely it devolved very quickly into like a huge battle where basically Jared's hometown got like attacked by a bunch of bandits, and it was a good time, but it was very different. So I was curious about his thoughts. I'm glad he liked it. I tried to do something a little different, so
It was fun.
Yeah, no, it was
But,
good. I like that kind of opening because it does like, it kind of gives you. I don't know. I'm a big proponent of like what Ed was saying earlier, like the backstory. Like you get like the first instance, and then it starts writing itself, and that's you completing the adventure. So that's the kind of that's how I would kind of my little one star. I don't like overly complex, and I don't like ones that are like super ethereal, if that makes sense. They're like, oh, I was somewhere deep in the Fae, and I was this cool like Fae guy, and then I got basically demoted to the regular world. You're like, okay, you're like, all right. I mean, cool. Like it's cool if that's like the theme of the whole movement, but like to just like
That's also I think
dropped is
exactly
like-
describing one of Ethan's characters.
is it?
I was actually re-listening to one of our old podcasts, and Ethan was telling me about a character who was the son of an archfey whose destiny was to reclaim his archfey ship, an archfey warlock. He may have never ended up playing it, but I heard it all.
I didn't end up playing the character, but also he didn't know necessarily like he had a bunch of power. But yes, I literally made the trope that Jared. Good thing I'm not playing it in Jared's campaign, apparently.
I just think
He's
like
like,
I don't know.
get that
I don't know.
Jared's
It
like,
just feels
get
it
that
just
monarchical
feels
bullshit out of here.
I don't know.
This
It
is
just
America.
it feel like I like it's one thing to like nerf your person mechanically. I think thematically nerfing yourself is kind of lame because your whole thing
Yeah.
is like to be built up, right?
I think
So like if
I
you
think
nerf
it's
yourself and then like your whole thing is like a resurgence up, it's like why are okay. I mean,
I
it's
think
kind
it
of
would
cool,
be
I
cool.
guess.
I could have played the character like this too. It would have been cool though too, because it would have been cool though too if it could have been. I think it, and I would agree with you. I'll give you this. It'd have been stronger if he was like, I'm half elven. I understand my Fey ancestry, and I want to become an Archfey. But I'm like, I've never been to the Fey realm. I've never met an Archfey, but that's my goal. I want to have a fiefdom in the
that
in the
that
Feywild.
I like. I just don't get like the I don't get I'm gonna coin like a thematical demotion. I don't see like the point in like being all the way up here and then bringing yourself down and then coming all
I
the
actually
way
have a
back up.
huge. I actually disagree with that entirely.
I don't like that
there
at
there are
all.
there are two characters I've had in players in games that have done this, and the first one was a character who was a high level wizard who actually had his knowledge stolen from him, and his goal was to try and steal it back. And I thought that was a really cool. And basically, so he's having to deal with having been the top of his game and now
And then
being
now
the
he can just
bottom.
like
It's,
cast.
I mean, because you can think of it as being the equivalent of right. You're you were the CEO and now you're a janitor in the same building, right? Like
Yeah.
that's basically the story he was telling. The other one is actually a character Henry came up with, who was a high level rogue, like a pirate captain. Whatever, 10th, 11th, 12th level, and suffered a terrible head injury. So basically, his body, he lost all of his instincts and all of his fighting, like he doesn't have his maneuvers. Like he's not able to do what he
He has
was able to do
amnesia.
before it's kind of amnesia, but it's like specifically just he doesn't have his like muscle memory. So like he has no fighting skills and he has to slowly build them back up. And it's a similar thing too. And I
do like
think those can be done very
building back up.
well if you're investigating kind of the psychology of this character and how they're dealing with being at the bottom again. I think it can be interesting. I think it can be done badly, but I think there's really interesting ways to do it. I think that if people are using it as an excuse to have a really cool, interesting big world-altering backstory and then explain why they're starting at first level, I think it's kind of crummy. If they're actually interested in looking at why, this tragedy happening and how that
It's
affects the
almost
character,
like
I
the
think it's really
backstory
cool.
doesn't matter. The backstory is the afterthought of this idea, and it's what they're doing moving forward. That's actually what they care about. Like, how do we struggle with it? Yeah.
Exactly.
I'm okay
That's
with
more what I'm interested in.
I'm cool with the pirate one. I said ethereal. Just to make
Sure.
that clear. We can kind of do the semantics there, but I said ethereal because like you said, it like I feel like Ethan said, it's almost like a justification of why the guy is that way. And then you find him at like level
Sure.
1 and you're like, oh, you're this huge powerful guy, but now you're nothing, and now you gotta like
And I
claw your
will
way
say,
back.
I was trying to figure out with that Archfey character. I wanted to bring the Feywild in. It would basically I was trying to figure out a way where how can I put in my backstory the Feywild enough to where the DM is going to at some point take us there, right? Because I wanted to play in the Fey. In this particular instance, I was like, I want to play in the Feywild. So like, how do I set it up to where I'm not like telling the DM I want to do that, but I'm kind of leaning into that a lot to see if he'll move that direction at least at some point for my backstory piece, I guess.
For sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So-
I mean that's just that's the one thing that kind of irks me. I just don't like I don't like the up and like the upwards and then the demotion because I mean maybe it's just because it's like maybe it's a
Do you like
more-
the Rocky films?
Yeah, but that's different to me, I guess. Because that's
Okay.
not like the
It's not
scale.
ethereal.
Like an I'm cool with an underdog story.
But
But,
then
like-
he's not an underdog, and then he gets clobbered, and then he has to fight his way back up and beat the guy. and he gets
Mhm.
like dropped
Is
down to
this
the bottom.
is this like the
He
fourth
does
Rocky?
this-
How many Rockies deep
it's,
am I into this?
You are in the first 6 Rockies, which is all of them, and then the first 2 Creed movies.
Oh
Yeah.
my god, I forgot about the
Which-
Creed movies. You're right.
which-
They also do that.
Creed, I've seen 1 and 2. Is there a third Creed movie?
I have no idea. Is it Michael B.
One-
Jordan for all 3?
Yeah.
Is it actually?
1 and 2 were so good.
Yeah.
I actually thought those were awesome. Like I rewatched the Rocky movies, even a couple of them, and I'm like, I think Creed in some ways is better.
My
Yeah,
favorite
Just
boxing
in terms
under,
of its like,
my favorite one's still Cinderella Man with
Cinderella Man,
Gerard.
okay.
Is it
I
Gerard
love
Butler
Cinderella.
or Russell Crowe?
What was
I think
the
it's
one?
Russell Crowe.
Was it Hands of Stone? No,
Oh, no.
there's one about the guy who broke his neck and then like worked his way back up to be boxing world champion. He
I
broke
don't
his
have seen
neck
that
in a
one.
car accident. I'm
I
trying to
haven't seen that
remember.
movie. Look it up and let me know. But yeah, I think Cinderella Man's my bad. I don't have a problem with
Cinderella's
I don't have a
great.
problem with underdogs because that is like it's like it's a very individual thing, I guess. It's not like a cooperative
Lead for this. That's the name of the movie.
lead for this. I'm gonna look into that.
Yeah. It's with Miles Teller. He's the.
Oh,
he-
oh yeah,
stars
yeah,
it.
nice. Okay,
I haven't seen it.
No,
I
I didn't-
haven't
I
seen
hadn't even heard it.
Cinderella Man either. So
really, really good movie. Quite older. I think it's like a 2000s movie, but it's about
my
this.
wife referenced it like earlier today, actually.
No, she did
Like, I
not.
She did because it was about there was some actor in the show we were watching who was
Mm.
who's in Cinderella Man, but
Yeah, no, super good movie. It's about
Crowe?
it's Russell
Was it
Crowe.
Russell Crowe?
Yeah, was it Russell Crowe?
Because he starred in it.
Yeah, he's the
well,
was
going
it him?
to I guess
Real
tropes.
quick, another one's really good.
Oh, yeah.
Southpaw. Again, same trope. He's
Yeah.
like top of his game. Wife dies, gets knocked out. Basically, has to climb his way back up. Starts as a janitor, works his way back up.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Like, again,
like
I
that
don't have a
trope
problem
lot.
with it. It's just like that's the one trope that I just like. It because it's always
Sure.
maybe it's because the scale is too big. Maybe that's it.
Okay.
Maybe because like in
Sure.
this scope it's boxing and it's just boxing and that's it and it's all that
Yeah.
ever is. And
And
instead
that's
of
probably
like
why he didn't have a problem with like he was a great pirate captain, top
Yeah.
of his game. But
exactly.
He's not. He has to work his way back up.
Because being
Yeah.
a pirate captain is different than being a 12th level wizard. Yeah,
Correct.
I got you.
Or a 12th level
Yeah.
like arch or working towards an archfade, which is just like
It tracks.
yeah.
Well, here's the one that one that I really don't like. This isn't so much as a trope, but this is something that players will present is the lone wolf.
Ugh.
If you're doing a lone wolf as a lone wolf and not as like I'm a lone wolf, but my whole character arc is, learning to lean on other people, that's fine. If your thing is like I'm a lone wolf, and I'm gonna stay a lone wolf, rewrite your character. The other thing that I don't like, and I'm gonna, so there's these two things that are very similar. I really like one, and I really don't like the other one. The thing that I really don't like is the amnesia backstory. The here's a blank slate DM, me from age 10 to 20. I don't remember anything. I don't really like that. It strikes me as lazy. What I really like is the found child trope, which I had with Argus, where he got found at like age
Yeah.
2 in the woods, and then he had his whole backstory. And
Yeah.
one of the characters in my current campaign, he's a half elf, was basically found at the bank of a river as an infant, and then he had his whole backstory. So
Mhm.
what I feel like if you're leaning towards doing any sort of amnesia in your character, don't do amnesia and do like the found child, because it allows you to have a backstory, and it also gives the DM a mystery to incorporate into the game, which is I think more interesting than the pure amnesia, because amnesia feels like a way out of dodging a backstory. Found child feels like you're writing a backstory and giving the DM something to play with, which I for one love, because I love taking that and like turning it on the player in the most friendly way possible. Because it,
And then
You
you
know,
end
your
up
ca-
seeing a entire room full of the desiccated bones and dismemberments of your family.
Yep.
Well, that was your thing, right? Because your character
Yeah.
got found by the Golden Dragons, and it turned out, right, he was actually intended to be a camera, basically, for the bad guy, right?
Yep.
Trauma.
Big. The character
Because
in
he
this current
murdered all of
campaign
back in.
found out that it's his backstory. This is not so he got found at the river's edge, and when he was, in his early teens, he was kind of off by himself at this place he used to stand by the river, which is close to where he was found, and he lives next to this body of water that is particularly haunted, let's say, and his town got attacked by ghosts, and he ran in and he ran into the town. He found his family murdered, and this ghost attacked him, like clawed him up, or hurt him, and then he was saved by the guy who would become his mentor. And he basically is part of this order that's like ghost hunters, but he's the blood hunter. And what I added to his backstory, because right, he was a half elf. He was raised by a human and a half orc, right? So he wasn't their kid. He was found on the edge of this river. What I added to it that he eventually discovered was that he was the son of basically a couple hundred miles south of where they were. There was an elven kingdom, basically a really sort of militaristic, authoritarian elven kingdom, and he's the son of the princess of this elven kingdom, along with a human mercenary. So big no, and what happened was his mother was exiled for, getting with a human, actually for marrying a human. And what ended up happening is shortly thereafter, he discovered this. This is stuff that I added in addition to his full backstory. He found there's a prophecy about the half-breed born at Autumn's Turn, which is him. And so basically his grandmother went to try and kill him. And the reason why he was found on the edge of the river is because his grandmother murdered his mom next to this river, and was cursed by the waters, because the water. I'm not going to go too far into what the lake does, but the lake is kind of a hub for spiritual activity. So basically, when the grandmother murdered his mom, she murdered her own daughter, and the lake basically claimed her as a banshee and decorporealized her. But what ultimately ended up happening is that the ghost that killed his adopted family and tried to murder him was his grandmother. And that was all stuff that I was able to put in for him to discover because he had this, which I really liked. So long way around of just saying found child trope is great.
I will say there's one that I forgot to mention. I like the Legolas-esque kind of one, where it's like father wants person to be, or not father, but like parent wants child to follow in exact footsteps. Child just goes off the rails entirely. That's kind of hard to run in the campaign, but I do like that trope. If you can pull it off.
I like flipping that trope too, because there's another trope where it's like father doesn't want, or authority figure does not want child to do exactly what he does. Child does exactly what he does anyway.
Yes, becoming the monster we are already. The monsters we know.
I love that trope too.
Yeah, that one's really that whole like expectations and like, oh, I'm not gonna, I'll never let my child be this way, and then your child turns out exactly as you were. You're like, damn. All right.
Those are both good ones.
I had a player once play the parent of a child. And those interactions as a DM were super fun as the kid, because he's like, I don't want you to make the same mistakes I did. And the kid's like, well, I'm going to, basically, because I want to be just like you.
It's almost, it's almost like Oedipus X, right? esque.
Yeah.
Sorry, like Oedipus esque. Like, oh, I don't want them to follow this terrible fate, and then it just happens.
Yeah.
Anyways, you're like, all right. You're like, well, we tried. Fate said no. Too bad. So sad. Sorry, buddy.
No, I've never had a. I don't think I've ever. Well, I take this. I take it back. I've had one player who played a character with a kid, but what I dropped it on him. This is a bit of a tangent, but this is a funny story because he was a College of Eloquence bard who was sort of I'm a ladies' man, and one of the characters approached me. She was playing a character. It was kind of one of the darker characters in the game I played, but she was she was playing basically someone who murdered rapists was her thing. Her backstory was that she was a midwife, and she kind of ended up starting to kill. Yeah, basically took it upon her. It was in Theros, so like the gods intervene very directly. So her patron god was basically like, I've chosen you to avenge, the wrongs done to these women or whatever. So this was her thing that she did. And she'd asked me specifically early on in the campaign, like, is there a scene where I could help, like, where we could show up and I could help a woman, like, have a kid, like, in the game? Because I think it'd be kind of cool. And I'm like, I've never done that before. I'm okay with that. Like, I think that's kind of an interesting thing. Like, if your character's a midwife, we can have a moment for you to kind of shine like this. I think it's a really unusual and interesting thing. So we did it. And I ended up having it be the kid of the ladies' man bars.
Nice.
With the woman that he'd had a one night stand with, and he
Nice.
so he it was a really amusing. So I guess that's the only time I've had a character who had a child
Awesome.
in game.
It's unfortunate because it's not like a true RPG, right? You can't just like fast travel back home all the time. So it's like all these like extra, bells and whistles that get attached to it in the form of like family or businesses or whatever, horses, pets. It's like you can't really like consistently pull at them without having to like either A, stay in the same place, or B, like constantly give updates like, oh, this is doing this person's doing that, and then like it kind of just lulls.
I think it depends on the campaign.
Or you
right,
can do
and
the
I mean,
what's the method where
that
like
person does a great job of that.
what's the method where you like it's like, oh, who do you have, where are your loved ones, and then like every villain takes the loved one every time, you know what I mean, whatever that method is.
Yeah,
like it's like the Mario method, I guess. I'm gonna call it the Mario and Peach method.
I think you've kind of hit on something, Jared. Like, I think that's part of the reason why a lot of people, their backstories have everybody dying.
Yes. Oh, 100%. 100%.
It simplifies your campaign.
100%.
Right? If you
Yes.
don't have that, because the villains can't get in against them, but also you don't have to deal with like, we got to go back home, or like what's going on, or how do I write a letter, and we don't have, it's like, oh, okay, I'm just focusing on myself basically.
It's a solo. It's just a group
too.
of solo adventurers that decided to stay together.
Well, that's the thing too, is you have like what I've seen too is there's like long form campaign backstories and there are short form campaign backstories, right? Because like if you have a short form campaign backstory, right, you're not going to put in like the conflict you have with your child or your father, or you're going to do like, if you're going to do something, you may have like, I have this bad guy or I have this rival or something that's going to come up, that you can possibly resolve. And this is something I try to do with short form campaigns is I try to take a villain that in some way is connected to every player. And I don't try to do it like, maybe it's someone who is included in the backstory and I, reveal over the course of the game that they were connected to everybody else. But I prefer to just have somebody that I create that turns out to have been like, it's kind of this idea of like fate. Everything kind of ties this group together. But with a longer form campaign, I'm perfectly like, that's what we're doing right now is like the current arc we're in right now is like our artificer. We're finishing up his backstory very shortly. And his whole motivation for becoming a hero is like he was sort of emasculated by losing his monopoly on, basically providing magic items by this up and coming artificer, this new guy who ended up beating him in the annual competition, and which he'd never lost before, and he just started beating him. And the character, he lost first his arm in an experiment, and then he ended up losing both of his legs, and like he kind of didn't really pay attention as much as he should have when his wife passed away, and his daughter basically was eventually like, he like, look, Dad, you're pushing yourself too far. I'm not going to let the grandkids see you anymore. Like, you're no longer a hero. Like, you're not my hero, basically. And like his whole thing, the reason why he went out is he's like kind of in this insane drive to prove like, yes, I'm the hero. I'm more
Yeah.
heroic than everybody else. And we're getting to the point where we're able to, after a year and a half, resolve his like delusions of grandeur, and we're finally getting to the point where he's like encountering his family again, having actually done some very heroic things, and actually but also being insane. And kind of he may end up not being insane at the end of the game for the end of the session, the next session actually, but he's having to basically kind of come to terms with sort of his madness, and like the fact that he you know put his pride in front of his family and then ended up destroying everything. So like, I think that's great to do if you have the time for it. I think
Yeah.
it's really really great to explore, and just leads to a real richness in the story. But if you have an 8-week campaign, no way.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's one of those things you can always add post as well, like post haste. Like if you think it's going to be short and then it ends up being an actual long haul, you can do it kind of like arc wise. So like first arc, you weren't focused on it at all. Second arc, you weren't focused on it at all. Third one comes around, and now you have like this, like kind of bond, I guess is the word, between everybody. So now it's like,
Yep.
now you can get like that letter, and you're like, oh my god, my I don't know. Give me an example here. Somebody help me. My father is sick and dying, and
Yeah.
he's gonna go give me a last wish or whatever. And then like your party would care a lot more. Like, so I think you
That's
can add it
great.
post
Yeah.
as well. I don't think it has to be an immediate, like if you don't do it the first time you're screwed. But I do understand
Well, I
that like
agree.
the short
And that's
short
the
version, there's no real point in investing in it, especially for the
And that's the
DM.
critical role. That's the critical role method, right? Is like the whole bit with like the critical role campaigns is like everybody has something they need to resolve, and like
Yes.
basically they're together by happenstance and they resolve somebody's problem, and then they're like, okay, this, the person whose problem was resolved, they're like, well, I can, you guys help me resolve my issue. I'm going to stick by you guys and help you resolve yours. And that's kind of what I'm at. The stage I'm at with my campaign right now is like two of my characters have had their backstories resolved and are now just kind of exploring more of who they are, which is fun in a way too. One of the characters has a new patron. One of the other one, well, well, I guess the other one kind of went insane. Is currently um, taking a break, and it doesn't matter. But anyway, they've had some development with their character even after their arc, and now they're like, we're gonna stick with you guys because um, you guys help me, and we're kind of now becoming a group because of this. So, and that's kind of the element of like they've been integrated into a backstory, right?
Yeah, but
Like they're
like
part
you
of
were
each
saying,
other's
like
backstory.
yeah, and like I was saying, like if you can already, like that's their job, right? Like they're famous voice actors. They get paid a ton of money, or they maybe they don't get paid. But they
This
they
is the
make a
thing,
ton of
they're
money.
good
They're
players.
already committed to it though. Like they know it's going to be that way. You
Also,
never
they're
really
good players,
know.
right? Because they know that to tell a story, yeah, sometimes you have to suspend things and you have to move the plot along. So, like, yeah, your character could be like, "Bye, my stuff's resolved. Thumbs up to you. Thanks, guys." And then just I'm a bounce now because I already am self-serving and blah blah blah. But like, you as a player need to also play. You need to play your character, but you also need to play knowing that you're in a set of rules and restrictions within a D&D game. And so
Yeah.
it's not fun if every single person leaves right after and then they're like left with one person at the end who doesn't have their stuff resolved. You can't play a game with one player.
Yeah.
So
For sure.
I think that it also, you need to be aware of and if you play your character right, even a self-serving character, if he is helped to resolve his problem, most likely will still not want to just leave, even if he was self-serving, because in the process of being helped,
He
will
learns the value.
discover,
Yes, I was just
like,
gonna say
I need people, right?
that's
So
a good
you
playing
can
a
still
good
play
playing
those kind of.
mindset.
I feel like some people are like, oh, well, my character just wouldn't, and it's like your character didn't grow at all. We've played for 6 months to resolve
That
your thing.
phrase, that could be a whole nother topic, but that phrase should be voiced like
Oh, my character
should be
right,
voided. It should be voided at like 3, like past
Yeah.
3. You should never use that phrase.
That's the thing with the characters, right? Is like I think that if you build a character that doesn't have a reason to stick with the party, you did not build a good character.
And that's the whole going kind of back to your lone wolf trope. Like,
Yeah.
don't be a lone wolf
Exactly
or lone wolf
right.
snake. Be lone wolf where you're like, maybe you were a misfit and nobody wanted you in their group, and then so you're wary, right? But then, like, as people accept you and blah blah blah, you're craving that, but you're just a lone wolf because you were kind of pushed into it, right? That's a
By
cool character,
necessity. Yeah.
right? But
Even
That's interesting.
even
So
Batman
here's
works for the
what's
Justice League,
Yeah.
right? Even
But
Batman does it.
Here's the coolest thing, right? This is like one of the moments I'm most happy about with some of my players, right? Because we have 2 characters, and they're actually played by brothers. And one of the character, like the whole bit with the 2 characters, they kind of became friends, and they were both kind of the first like real friends each other had. Like, because like before that, one of them had kind of been traveling alone because he was a werewolf, and the other one had like a mentor, but had never really had a peer. It was the Blood Hunter, and so basically, what happened is they grew very close, and the character playing the Blood Hunter had to leave for he was actually going to study abroad for a few months, so we had to do a write out for him, and our write out involved him basically. It's not this literally, but like pulled into a portal to hell, probably dead, right? So not actually hell. It was the gray realms, which is kind of more like it's not hell, but it's like ghost hell. Anyway, I've got a few hells in my world.
I was not expecting that at all.
You can never have enough hells in your world, Ed.
Pulled away
It's a
straight
horror-
to hell. Straight to hell.
It's a horror
Straight to hell.
campaign. So there's
Over-
like three.
over
There's like 3
Cricken,
kind of
Straight
hells.
to hell.
Study abroad.
so basically-
straight to hell.
So basically, what happened though is like he, this one character was written out, and the other character ended up starting because he was a Twilight Domain cleric. He started taking levels after that happened of Vengeance Paladin. Because and basically then switched out his cleric spell list, so like he's not a healer anymore. Like, because he basically like had this psychological trauma of like his only
His best friend. His only
being
and
like
best
taken
friend.
away, which happened because of outside of game reasons, but we integrated it into the game. And then what happened is he ended up resolving his own backstory. And then, after, a little while, the player ended up coming back who was playing the Blood Hunter because he got back into the States. So we reintroduced him, and we, came up with a reason how it happened. And he kind of made his way back, and basically the cleric paladin sort of had like a mental breakdown and like was slowly moving towards kind of going crazy. And basically a couple sessions ago, he and I engineered this because he's like, I really think this is what is going to happen with my character right now, and this is what I think needs to happen. So I basically engineered it that they got attacked by some bandits who were like some starving farmers.
Mhm.
And the cleric was the one on watch and basically snapped and killed almost all of them. Like, first level people.
Yeah.
you know, not even, you know, bandits, like
Burn.
killed all these people that were like starving farmers, and then like had a mental breakdown and was like, I don't know who I am anymore. Like, because his entire character was centered around vengeance for first his parents' murder and then his friend's death, and like basically had a break. And
I was so sick.
currently is on leave. He has like a kind of back, like not a backup character, but a replacement character currently traveling with the party, because his main character, like basically he's like, I think this is where his arc is going and I want to do this, and have him, spoiler alert from my campaign, he's going to be coming back at sort of an opportune moment. But like his whole thing is he's like, I think that he's kind of at a break. And now, if you actually are in my campaign and you're listening for whatever reason, do not listen to the rest of this episode. Stop listening.
Stop it.
Like I'm not kidding. Stop listening.
I
Go
don't
away.
know.
Go away. We're giving you 5 seconds. Get out right now.
5,
But 5,
Four,
4,
3,
3, 2,
2,
1.
1.
Only William can listen because he already knows it's coming. So, so basically, he's currently playing. I might have sent you guys this, but I homebrewed a rogue subclass. It's called the Poisoner.
Yeah.
Um, and I think I've edited it actually since I sent it to you guys. But he's playing a Poisoner rogue who, like, his on the face is like a, you know, guy who is a magic item collector who deals with kind of arcane potions, but in actuality is a assassin sent to kill actually the best friend of the cleric who left. Because
this poor guy gets
he's
sucked into hell, comes back, die.
well, because he's the one with the prophecy about destroying the Elven kingdom. So
so everyone will be dead.
there's an assassin coming after him to basically be like, you don't get to make the, you know, you're not going to get to do that. We're going to make sure that my house ends up on top. And what we're going to have eventually is when that reveal occurs is that that's going to be the moment when the cleric paladin returns as a oath of devotion instead of vengeance, and kind of comes to save the day.
That's awesome.
So that's an instance of like what I think is just an example of what you can do with backstory that develops over the campaign, right? Like your characters are not static, right? You can let the events of the campaign affect them.
Yep.
And
my character started out in my family campaign. My character started out a reskinned Lycan blood hunter who had been tortured horribly by a mage, a black robe mage, because we're playing in Dragonlance, and horribly, like, completely disfigured, and like he transforms into like a half dragon. Basically, it's a reskinning. He has the same powers as a werewolf, just he's a dragon. And it was a curse, and he kept killing people that he was close to because he couldn't control his power. And a whole bunch of other stuff happened and all this stuff. And like he met one character who my brother's playing, who's like this prophetic figure who's bringing back the old gods. And he started like learning about the old gods. And he ended up completely getting reskinned through a huge process I won't go into. But basically, this god of like war in the Dragonlance pantheon, he started kind of having a devotion to him and like praying and doing that kind of thing. And basically, he gets pulled in, and he's like, "You can be my champion," but like through this process, and I basically got reskinned, quote unquote, my character into a war cleric. So, but it made sense with the story, how the story was going, what my character was doing, how my character actually is based, and then him having this curse, like what would have, he wouldn't have leaned it based on what happened. He wouldn't have leaned into the curse, because I was thinking it could go one of two ways, right? He could really lean into the curse, and he almost did a couple of times, or he would choose not to. And so, and it was just cool how that resolved. But it's totally flows. Like multi-classing can come out of a long campaign simply because your character has been affected by something, and that changes his trajectory, right? Especially if you're not focused on like power scaling or being, top tier damage output, machine.
I mean,
right?
that happened to the first character I played in. I guess the second character I played in Jared's campaign, like junior year. Remember Regulus?
Mhm.
Yeah, he was the former slave, but he ended up praying for divine intervention when he was on death row and rolled 2 natural 30s. So ended up multi-classing from assassin rogue into war domain cleric. Was
And yes, you heard that
actually
right. Natural 30s.
yes, the 30-sided dice,
30.
natural 30s. Yeah.
Yep.
So ended up being a multi-class with the rogue and the cleric, which is a surprisingly solid multi-class, actually, believe it or not. But
You can sprinkle cleric into anything, basically.
you really could. Well, it's more. I mean, for most things, yeah.
I would
just
argue you
rogue
could
and
sprinkle rogue into anything as well.
That's true.
Just for the sneak
I mean,
attack.
I mean, 2 levels of rogue plus anything just for the cunning action is
Yeah.
pretty sick.
Yeah.
I think it'd be cool to play. I've actually been knocking this around in my noggin, playing a multi-classed rogue monk.
I've thought of it. It
where
works.
I'm
It
I
works
started out
super
as like
well.
a street rat, and it would have to be something that starts at like level 5 or higher. Because probably what I would do is I'd start as like 3 levels in rogue, as my backstory being like a cut purse or something, and then
Yeah.
finding my way into a monastery, being trained. So it would have to be one of those where it's like, we're starting at level 5. I've had a journey. So I have
Yeah.
3 levels in rogue, then I completely changed my ways, and now I'm a monk. And I probably could do like a Kensei monk or something, would be sick. And then
Yeah,
just go
for
from
sure.
there. I
Kensei
thought about
monk
that,
with a
though. I thought that
rapier.
was super cool.
Yeah, that'd
Yeah.
be pretty dope. But yeah,
This
rogue
is
definitely
an
does.
example of aesthetics and mechanics
before class.
formulating a backstory.
The last thing I think we have on our list here of kind of topics was we kind of wanted to talk about how each of us briefly, or we can go into as much detail as we want, how you create plot hooks in your campaign as a DM is more of a DM question. Do you base your plot hooks on character backstories? Do you just have certain plot hooks that are going to always be there regardless of backstory? How do you do this? A mix of both? How do you guys usually play that?
So yeah, I can take this first.
Go ahead.
So yeah, generally, if we're doing a more short form campaign, I will not even write the campaign until I know the backstories. Because I will, and I mean, the best way to show this is just by example, right? With Draco, from campaign a few years ago, right? That these guys both played in. We had 5 characters, and I was trying to find a bad guy that would sort of integrate all of them together. And I ended up settling on a purple dragonborn whose mother had been basically stopped by Ethan's character's adopted parents. Ethan, it turned out, I think we referenced earlier in the episode, was actually a science experiment by the villain of the campaign, the Purple Dragon. Then there was Jared's character was a dragonborn who was sort of basically devoted to, in that particular world, the dragonborn, they view their duty as keeping the balance between good and evil. And it just so happens that most of the time they're all good, because most of the time there's a lot of evil. So he basically viewed himself as, being the balancing factor to the evil dragon.
And he was from the warrior clan, so it was like a whole known thing.
Yeah. So could drive that towards evil dragon, have to stop him. Great. We had this character was involved in, the villain was involved in the Criminal Underground, which our druid was involved in as well. Thatch was involved in the Criminal Underground, and basically this guy was bad news. We then had one of the characters, his mother had been killed by a dragon. So while he didn't have a particular enmity towards this particular dragon, he had enmity and sort of a fear of dragons in general. And it led to sort of a character advancement moment for him. And then the last one was Alan. Alan was he was playing a warlock who had started a cult and basically ended up falling away from the cult, and his cult was supporting this dragon. So the cult that he was no longer a part of. So bit of a interesting. So I kind of tried to formulate the campaign, the everything around the villain, right? But with my current campaign, I didn't do that at all. I just took the villains from the backstories and just put them in. And because I had a long form campaign, so I basically was able to just take the backstories. And the very first arc we had was everyone's kind of like, hey, we're gonna get together and save the world, right? Arc, and they did, right? The first villain didn't. He had a connection to one of the characters, far too complex to go into now, but he. They stopped the first bad guy, and then they started from there, basically fixing everybody's backstories is where they're at so far. So they're about to resolve the third of the 6 characters' backstories. The rest of them will be following in pretty short order. So they're getting to the point now where they've been basically fixing everything up. And the reason for that is because most of them are from the same part of the world. But 2 of them, their backstories had to be resolved in the opposite side of the world. So they resolved that part first and then have worked their way back and are now taking care of the rest of it.
Cool.
I would say, I would say that mine. I don't think I've ever sat down and had the intention of making like a short version. I guess if that makes sense, like an 8 session or a 10 session, like an extended one shot. In my opinion, I don't think I've ever done that. So mine tend to just fall into. I try to make enough of a story arc that at least 1 to 2 characters can be the main portion, and then the next arc kind of flip flop or like move around from there. So like maybe from the village to the city is the first person's issue, or like resolve, and then when they're in the city they find a whole other issue, and kind of through that way. I wouldn't say it's super specific. I would say it's more that there's enough gaps that someone's backstory will connect to it. It has to, like, just by the nature of how people write them. At least start like certain players. If you know your players, it's a lot easier, right? If you play with, like the same groups every now and then, like the same like 3 people, you can always like guess that something's gonna be like either weird or wacky, but like you'll know like the one, like you'll know Ed wants to be the confrontational person. So like as long as you leave it open for some sort of confrontation, he'll take like someone will take the bait of the hook. So like that's pretty much. I mean, I don't really have any super good details because unlike Ed, I don't really write the short term, and for that reason, I feel like it allows me to not have to wait for the backstories. I can just plug and chug essentially.
Yeah,
and that's kind of how I would say I do it for the hooks. The hooks are definitely cured towards them, but like I mean, I think I leave enough either villains or neutral characters or something like that to kind of plug and play. But if you want to like I think what was Alden? Alden's character was like Harrison or something like that, the cleric guy.
Yep.
He had it. All I had to do was drop a church in the city that you guys were in, and boom,
Harvard.
Harvard, that's what it was.
Harvard.
Harrison. Yeah. That's all I had to do. That was like, and that was boom. Like that was super easy. Just drop him right there. He's already in the story.
And that's I think I'm hopefully past the stage of my life where I'm writing 8-week to 12-week campaigns because I'm no longer in college, so I can or having to fit a campaign into the summer, right? So it's a uniquely young person issue of trying to do a time, because I tried my first semester with that exact thing with the intent of carrying it on, and then I realized nobody had interest um over the summer, right? Like, once the summer passes, everyone's kind of forgotten what was going on or whatever. So at that point I was just like, okay, I gotta make the, maybe
Yeah,
give the suggestion that something more can happen, but get a complete arc done in
Right.
yeah.
a
But
summer
for those of us
semester.
for those of us on the adult schedule, you could do that. The longer
Yeah.
method.
Like I'm playing a long form. I wrote a long form campaign for you guys right now, and
Right.
what I do typically with my long form is it's interesting. I'm actually a hybrid even with my long form. So like, and Jared, obviously this happens naturally too. Um, all of the story specific hooks tie to backstory in
Mhm.
some way or another.
Right.
But I also have whole job boards, and I don't come up with a new job board for each town. I usually roll on a table, pick like 4 or 5 of a list that I have, and then like put it on. Oh, you see these 2 or 3 or whatever. Those are completely random. Like no matter what your characters were, it would have been the same thing. And those are kind of side things, and it may lead to other things or branch off that I can like kind of. I'll obviously play some jazz with, like, oh, you went and did this thing and you found this thing, which may be pertinent to somebody else's backstory. But that thing wouldn't have been there if that guy hadn't had that backstory, it'd been something else. Right. So in a sense, I can play with like, oh, this is a hook. This hook is a story hook and it pushes the main plot of the whole campaign. Right. Usually that means it's coming to a resolution of some one of the characters' backstories or everybody's backstory. Right. I also have hooks that are just like, whoa, this looks fun. This guy's paying a hundred silver for to like go kill this animal way out in the things and bring back its blood. Cool, let's do that. And then you can go do that. That's regardless of whether you were a mage or a wizard or a druid or whatever.
Yeah.
You get done that, come back and had like a completely different experience, but the hook would have been the same. You know, so I kind of do kind of like I do a hybridization of like, and it also it allows you as players, not as characters, it allows you as players to key in on like, oh, this is important, right? So this is maybe a hook I should take. If it's a job board and you don't take any of them, or you take one of them and not another, that's no big deal. But if I like by giving you something and being like, you recognize that symbol from your backstory, like it is integral to like something traumatic that happened in your past or whatever, that also keys you in as just a player to be like, okay, I need to push to get this hook, to do this hook because this hook is important to me. And it allows you as players to be able to keep kind of at least a working knowledge of, oh, this is kind of the road that we're traveling without feeling railroaded.
Right.
But it's a way for you to key in and not feel completely lost, right?
Do you find yourself writing in arc style as a person who watches a lot of One Piece? Because I found the more I watch it, the more I like that developmental like block of growth, I guess is the way I put it.
Yeah, I'm trying to not do that this campaign. I was
Interesting.
very much like that in my last campaign.
Okay.
But like where you guys are now, you're level 3, right? I think
Mhm.
you're level 3. Nobody knows really who you are, what you do. Like the people in your backstory do, but it's like right now you're just kind of out doing things. And like, yeah, this thing kind of fell into your lap and you're wanting to help the town and that's cool. I guess you just could have decided not to do that too. But like it's not like super. I'm trying to make it more like you're going to kind of explore the world for a little bit. You're going to get to go where you want to go. You guys are going to get to do what you want to do. You can ask me questions after this mini arc, quote unquote, like, whatever happens in this next session will probably end that arc. It's only been 2, yeah, air quotes.
He's doing air
It's only
quotes.
been 2, sorry, yeah, air quotes. It's only been 2 sessions, but like when that finishes or resolves, it'll probably be in less of like oh, we found this thing and it's going to push us here, and it's going to be more like, all right, level 3 people who have just kind of met and seem to be doing okay together. Like, where do you want to go? Do you have is there a particular place you want to try to go to? like that kind
That
of thing.
being
I'm gonna try to
said,
be a little more open ended about it, at least at the beginning.
Yeah, that's pretty open world look.
Yeah.
I like that.
which that being said, like I feel like that's the trajectory of most campaigns, right? If you start at a low level, it is that kind of odd jobs, random stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and then you start entering sort of the arc format. Because like D&D almost naturally takes a format of arcs, right? If you run with the big bad evil guy structure of like, this is a bad guy that you need to take out, right?
And people
And it
need
not like
people's arcs need to be resolved too,
Yeah.
right?
yeah,
Like their
and
backstories.
it's so it's like the first basically we've had 3 arcs in the campaign so far, right? And 3 overarching villains. My players have dealt with 2 of them. One of them was related directly to a character's backstory. One of them was not really directly related to anybody's backstory, and the last one is also not directly related to anybody's backstory. So we have these sort of arcs, but we have resolution of backstories in between or during. Is like one of the characters, his resolution of his backstory was eliminating the second big bad of the campaign. We've basically had 3 big bads, and they've sort of been introduced to the third so far. First 2 they've defeated. It's like, but the second one was one of the players getting their backstory resolved. The course of that, this second big bad had a partner of sorts who was the resolution to one of the other characters' backstories. So 2 of them sort of have had their character arcs resolved and are now moving next thing. And then now they're basically moving to the very south of my world. They are currently resolving one of the characters' backstories, the third one. They're going to be moving very shortly to the 5th and the 6th one, and then the one of them it might not be full resolution just because of the way the character works. But then the last character's arc is going to be the end of the campaign. So, and I already have the target there. So I kind of try to integrate the backstory resolution. But it naturally takes the shape of arcs, right? Because not even necessarily level dependent. Because like my characters, basically, they distinctly remember like this is the section before we defeated Osric, who was the first big bad, and I was like, this is between Osric and the Cuspid Chieftain, right? Who's the second big bad, and then like, okay, Cuspid Chieftain to Orin Rao, who's the third big bad. So, like, and that's where they are right now. So that it's kind of distinct feels to each part of the campaign that is affected by the boss they're approaching. And then backstory resolution can happen in between, but there's the overarching arc, I guess.
Yeah. There's a through line.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Well, does anybody have anything they want to add to the end of this episode here? We think we've covered a lot of ground on backstories and integrating them into your world, into your campaign. Anyone have any final thoughts?
Yeah, I'm just looking through our notes one more time.
Have fun making characters, guys. Make them wacky, make them crazy. Talk to your DM. Don't feel bad if your DM says, I like this, but let's do X, and let you tweak it. Tweaking doesn't mean that DM is upset with what you've come up with. It just means in his story, he's going to try to make it work. So it's a collaborative process. The DM is the only person who gets to know your backstory. So have fun kind of riffing off each other. Some of my favorite characters are ones that I came with a concept, but I didn't really know how to like fit it in. And then the DM, most instances, Ed, was like, oh, let's work on this. Let's play some jazz. Let's figure it out, and we'll make a dope character. So don't feel upset or like annoyed or frustrated if the DM is wanting to make tweaks. It means he's excited about the character and he wants to make it work in his campaign.
My last words would be it'd be this next sequence right after what Ethan just said. Let the campaign change your character. Let that happen, because that backstory is just your starting point. So like, don't be afraid if like you do become the war cleric after playing a rogue for 5 sessions. Like, just let it ride. it's so cool to see the end of it. Trust me, you'll love it. That's my last bit.
And I think I'll finish off by just reiterating both of those. I think those are both good points to end on. Keep, don't be oversensitive and work with your DM, but also, allow the campaign to give change to your character and allow that to evolve it, because that's, there really isn't that much fun, I think, in playing a static character.
If you start a character and know exactly what it is, and then end the campaign as the same exact character, you played the game wrong. That's the only way you can play D&D wrong.
I
In my
agree.
opinion.
I agree.
That and playing a lone wolf.
Yeah, and playing alone wolf. That's just a dick move, and don't do it.
But so I think we referenced last time that we might be touching on the magic systems this time. We did not, in fact, do that. So we, arcane versus nature versus divine. Maybe we'll do that next time. Maybe that's too broad. We could even. I mean, frankly, I could probably take each of those sections and make a whole episode.
We could do that, yeah.
Maybe we could just do the next 3 episodes are just a trifecta. We do one, then the other, and the other. Just knock them all out.
Yeah, we just kind of talk about how we could integrate that into our campaign, things that we've done, things that we've enjoyed. I think that could be fun.
The magic system is literally like the anime power system. There's so many different ways to do it. Unique things you can do.
Settings.
It's so fun.
Settings you can change, all that.
Yeah. Oh,
For
so
sure.
cool.
That's when you're getting that's a deep dive. That's a real deep dive.
Yeah, I definitely think we should do 3 episodes. One for arcane, one for nature, one for divine. Just
I think there we go. Well, I guess you guys have our next episodes laid out there. But that being said, thank you all for listening, and I don't know, stay frosty. We don't really have a sign off.
we gotta come up with one. It is winter time.
I guess
Stay frosty is apropos.
Stay frosty. Yep. All right. Bye, guys.
Bye, everybody.